Hey good people, Batavia here. We are back with this year's garden. Super excited. All right, let's dig in. Okie doke, so starting in the front yard garden and then we'll move to the backyard garden. This first narrow bed, we're gonna do sweet potatoes here if I can find the sweet potato slips. We also are gonna grow up this trellis cucumbers. We have the first germination. They were started looks like about 9 days ago I sowed them. And then over here we're going to use this to grow pole beans vertically. And so I'm waiting for those to come up. Moving over to this bed where I have grown sunflowers for the last few years, and it's one of the probably number one questions that I get when I'm working out here and people walk by is, are you doing sunflowers this year? And I absolutely am. I actually didn't plant any. Everything that's a sunflower in my garden this year has volunteered. Some of them will be in good spaces, others like in the front yard garden, this perennial flower bed, I'll need to pull some of these because these are just going to grow too close together. So just looking through the fence, I have cauliflower that started to head, and then we have some volunteer mustards, and then red cabbage or purple cabbage. So we'll see how those do. I purchased transplants for the cauliflower, the broccoli, the cabbage that you see here. So, and my collards in the back. So those are all purchased transplants. I have trouble starting those particular vegetables from seed. So, broccoli all along, which at this point is growing and looking good. I've not been able to get broccoli to grow past June before it bolts. So I'm expecting to have this out of the garden in the next 30 days or so. And then we'll come in with some other summer crops based on kind of what I have. Good morning. What I have left to plant out. So the lettuce up here has all volunteered. Earlier in the spring, I basically transplanted it along this row on the edge, which is a great use of space. Strawberries here, which will definitely need some cover. And then we have volunteer mustards. These two, I have a tomato plant, uber small. They're about 6 weeks old, started from seed indoors and brought out actually pretty young a couple of weeks ago, and then transplanted in last week. Over here, I just put this tulle fabric on this weekend. I have quite a bit of damage to this cabbage. These are 4 cabbage plants, and then some beautiful, I think that's Marvel, 4-season lettuce in there. But the cabbage moth has already gotten to them, the worms. I'm picking them now daily since I just covered it to try to salvage them. This bed here is one of the fire pits. I used to have 4 of them, one here, here, and then basically one behind each of them here. But I moved them last year when I dug up this space. And so it's one of the challenges when you have a smaller garden space. And, relatively speaking, this is small compared to people that are gardening on a 1/4 of an acre or something, of course. But what do you do with the things that you don't use when you're done using them? So I actually decided to double this. These are basically 2 fire pits. I stacked them, and at the bottom layer where the soil stops is the first fire pit, and I have seed potatoes there. And then I put straw on top, like a take on the Ruth Stout method. In her days, she'd recommend hay, but I don't have access to that. So that's what we have here. We're still trying to decide what we're going to use for that space there. There are a couple of things that have volunteered, a couple of things that I planted out, but we'll get that space together by the time I share this space with you next time. We just put out pepper plants. They're so itty bitty. So just know that we have pepper plants here. I picked up these onions from my local home improvement store in their garden center. The onions I started by seed. I actually let die before we even got a chance to get them outside. So, it happens. I have some volunteer cilantro, more lettuce that I moved, that volunteered, and then intentionally planted here. And then I have a couple of mustard plants that look really good. The update on this newer bed here, and this is the womp womp moment. So my asparagus just didn't produce. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of the crowns. I think I put 8 in this bed that basically came up last year. And then, against my better judgment, I thought, well, they all didn't come up. Well, maybe next year, maybe in year 2. And that's just not how that works. So anyway, I worked with the company and they were able to issue a credit for the purchase. So there was no money loss, just a little bit of disappointment. But I turned this around, and so I have tomato plants. If you see a stake next to a tomato plant like that, the bamboo stake, it's the signal for me to say you're trying to single stem this. So I've tried this kind of haphazardly a couple of years, single stemming. It would allow me to try different varieties, plant more tomatoes. And while I know that I'll get fewer, I will still be able to maybe get some larger ones, but again, be able to try some different varieties, which I'm super interested in. Speaking of, I have a bunch of tomato starch still here, and then half a tray in the backyard. So let's get to the backyard. We'll come back for a separate update on the containers since I'm still working on planting them out. I have a potato bed here. So the largest potato plant in the middle volunteered, which means I didn't dig up potatoes last year. I sowed those seed potatoes here in this row, and I sowed them on the other end of the bed using like what I consider the traditional method of putting the seed potatoes down, putting 4, 5, 6 inches of soil on top. And so those are doing well. And then in the middle, I tried again this Ruth Stout method, and I can see some of the potatoes coming up. So I dug out the soil. It's probably seed potatoes sitting on maybe 4 inches of soil, and then it's all straw on top. So those are taking a little bit longer to come up. You can see them here, right there. I have a lot of volunteer sunflowers, which again, I think those are probably birds and squirrels dragging them around. I don't remember moving soil from up front back here, but we'll end up pulling those out of the bed, I'm pretty sure. But I have sown pole beans here. And then inside the bed, I saw the first signs of corn. And then I have some onions that I did direct sow, which I think is probably going to be basically harvested as green onions based on the timing. Garlic that was sown last November, doing well. And in this space, we have tomatoes. So there's a short that's either out or will be coming out. I'll link it whenever it does come out, where it kind of shows you just basically me setting this up. Super simple. Since I'm not as confident in my carpentry skills, you'll notice that I'll use basically everything besides wood in my garden because it's easier to cut something like PVC pipe and fasten it to things. The regular raised beds, if I'm building a rectangle, I'm super confident in that. I can do that all day, every day, and twice on Sundays. But once you start to get into angles and things, that's where my confidence starts to wane. So I kind of default to what I'm more comfortable with. And these things, I'm able to repurpose, reuse. If this works the way I think it's going to work, then I can easily move this to this set of beds next year. Okay, let's open this up and show you a little bit closer. Okay, so I haphazardly pinned this netting last night, but the whole intention here is to prevent the squirrels from getting to the tomatoes when they ripen, right? And it's always better to do these types of structures if you're going to do something before you start planting or right when you're planting. So you don't have to worry about stepping around things once the plants get bigger. So that is what I did here. So I know it, when you look at it now, it's kind of like, well, is it really necessary? It's a lot. But hopefully it will serve the purpose. The netting is getting caught on every nail that I've ever used in the raised beds. So that's one thing that I kind of keep in mind every time I use a cover of some sort, like that fencing for the tomatoes in the front yard by the house. All of those things kind of deter me from actually working in that space. So again, not ideal, but you kind of do what you have to do. So the way I've set this up is actually, other than the nails and the netting getting caught on the nails, pretty easy to get in and out of. So then I have pepper plants here. And then on the edges, I have carrots on this edge, which they were transplanted when I was thinning from over there. They were direct sowed over there. And then I sowed some here on that edge of the bed, which I really like using the edges of beds for things like this. I have onion seeds that, again, are probably going to be treated like green onions here. And then I'm still on the fence. I'm thinking basil is going to go in front of the tomato plants. I was thinking maybe a couple of pepper plants, but we'll make that decision today once I get to working in the garden. And the cage baby, no tomatoes yet. I'm considering trying a tomato plant once I pull up my garlic, which would be a real stretch because the garlic probably won't come up until like the first week of July maybe, and that's pretty late to put in tomatoes. I've done it 1 or 2 years, but I can't remember exactly how great the harvest was. But anywho, I say that to say tomatoes are not being grown right now in this space. We have a bunch of brassicas, so I'm going to be taking these covers off because I waited too long to cover them. So now I'm coming in daily to pick cabbage worms off of the leaves to try to get that under control. So in addition to looking for worms, I'm looking for poop, because if there's poop, there's worms somewhere eating. And I'm also looking for new damage. One of the challenges of gardening in a space like this is this set of beds in the cage sit up against my neighbor's fence, and so I only can get to one side of it. And generally when growing taller crops, it's not an issue, at least not once things start to grow up. But with growing things that are kind of short, especially based on the way that I plant them, you have to work a little bit to get inside of the beds. Clearly I could just plant everything closer to the opening and it'll be easier, like these plants. But I want to try to maximize the space. So that's why you'll see me do things like lettuce right here, because I know that's not going to grow all season. I'll be able to let it grow and harvest. Get to these, which are going to be grown shorter based on the variety. This is again the Morris Head cabbage collard, and then this is just labeled collard greens when I purchased the transplants. So I'm going to check these other plants. Things look good. So once I get to the point of like about 7 days of no worms, no appearance of new damage, then I feel like I'm in the clear, and then I'll be able to leave it covered and just again periodically check it. One of the balances with the cover is you can't quite see, especially with this row cover, you can't see as well as you can, which we'll show you in the other bed with the tulle fabric. So you can see the tulle fabric much thinner, easier to take a look at. I can actually just glance in here and see what I think is old damage versus what I think is new damage. I want to make sure that if the cabbage worm got in here and laid eggs, after or just before I covered it, that I watch for those itty bitty worms to make sure they're not eating away at anything. The goal here would be to cover these immediately after planting to prevent this whole dance. But again, after a week or so, we should be in the clear. Okie doke, thanks for spending some time with me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below, and I'll see y'all on the next one.